Have you ever, sorry, I won't even ask, have you ever, what have you done? No, sorry, I won't even ask what you did. What have some of your friends, fine, done that, and they're kind of waiting for that other shoe to drop, but they did something wrong, and they're just like, oh man, like every time that door opens and there's a call slip, or every time a cop goes down the street, you're looking out the window. Nothing, huh? You're all angels and so are your friends? I believe it. I also remember that Satan was an angel, wasn't he? So I believe it. Yeah, I think that this is something that's pretty, I don't want to say easy, it's pretty simple. And it's something that I think that we can all probably intuitively understand and almost agree with. And it's that word waiting. And it's the things for which we wait. Like, if you think about the kinds of things that we think about waiting for a person to change, good luck. Good luck. You just might be waiting a while. Have you ever known somebody who has really, like, genuinely changed in some way? No, probably not. Probably not. They do come around once in a while, but there has to be some sort of a significant event that really drives a person to change. In other words, there has to be, like we might say there has to be a reason for it. No, lots of people have reasons for it. If you're thinking about a person, jeez, I'm waiting for my voice to get better. You think about, like, for example, we have like a parent who's an alcoholic. We might think, oh, we're waiting for them to change. They just need to have a really good reason for it. Well, don't they already? A family, children who are depending on them. Something about self-actualization. People have lots of reasons to change away from that. Some people think that they're going to, I don't know, turn it around in school and start doing better. Maybe. We might be thinking, well, I'm just waiting for a reason. Don't we already have reasons? And we think about, I'm going to start eating better, getting into shape, drinking more water. And we think, well, the person just needs to have a good reason for it. We already have good reasons for it. What we don't have is something to compel us to do it, oftentimes. This is why you'll find people who, like I think about my dad, for example, he worked at McDonald's his whole life. And so, of course, as to be expected, later in life he developed diabetes because he ate McDonald's food his whole life. Once he found out that he had diabetes, how long did it take him to change his eating habits? That very same day. There was something in him that all of a sudden just like that switch just got flipped, and he genuinely stopped eating all of that stuff in the course of just one day. Did he have a reason to do it his entire life? Well, of course he did. Of course he did. But he didn't have something that really compelled him to do it. A lot of times we need to have something outside of ourselves that compels us to take an action that we already know that we should be taking. So the question, I guess, becomes, why don't we take that action if we know that it's going to be good for us? In other words, if we know that we should be drinking more water, why don't we, I don't know, put down the Diet Coke and drink more water? It's a good question, Scout. If we know that if we know that we should be exercising more, what is it that has to happen for us to do it? Why do we have to wait until something significant happens? Because I think what we're going to find is, for example, if you're eating in such a way that you develop diabetes, imagine how much better your life would be if you had started eating properly before that. You feel better, you have more mental clarity, you have more energy, all of these kinds of things. And it's an interesting thing to actually ask people that you know in your life, especially older people who have had something significant happen in their life, like that, or like a divorce, or like losing a job. And especially if you can give it a couple of years of clarity, like a height from which we can look back on that tragedy, and ask the person, was your life better before or after that event that motivated you to change? Or at least motivated a change. Even if it wasn't a personal choice, it was something that forced us to change anyway. And I think what you're going to find is that for the most part, people will report that the change was a very positive thing in their life. Even at the time if it seemed like it was crushing and defeating. that one thing that changed their life typically changes our lives for the better. And so it begs this question about humans, about what is it about us that we need to have something terrible happen in our lives in order to motivate us? Or I guess we could even ask the question, what are we waiting for? Because waiting is painful. That's true. If we're waiting for a person to change, of course it's painful, because there's not much that you can do about it. But it's a funny thing. We see people who are in desperate need of change, and we think that about them. Like, God, how come you won't just change? We give them all the support they need. We give them all the help that they need, or at least we give them all the support we think they need. We give them all the help that we believe that they need. And we're waiting for that person to change, and all the while there's probably somebody else out there who's waiting for us to change. Or maybe we're waiting for ourselves to change. In that case, with the other person, there's not much that you can do, except wait. And we might think we can give them help and support. I don't know, does help and support really help people change? Or does it just enable them to stay exactly as they are? It's like I had a friend of mine was complaining a few years ago about the way that guys behave and that guys dress and that guys talk and everything. She's like, why do you guys do that? I go, first off, let's draw a distinction. But secondly, why do guys behave the way they do? Well, because girls put up with it. And why do girls behave the way they do? Because guys put up with it. You'll find that the kind of people you put up with will typically be the kind of people who enter your life. And the kind of people who you want in your life and you behave in a certain way, those will be the kind of people who will enter your life. We typically get what we settle for, whether it's people around us or whether it's for our own behavior. If we're waiting for somebody else to change, why don't they change? Well, because we're still around, because we're enabling them. But isn't it cruel to leave the person? Is it cruel? It depends on what we mean by that. You mean, does it make the person feel alone? Does it make the person feel like maybe they're at bottom? Does it make the person feel terrible? Yes, probably. But what's better? That, or enabling them and letting people feel good about those situations in which they've chosen to put themselves? And even if we again, we think of it as being very cold to think of it as, well, people have chosen to be in those situations, but in a very strong sense they have. They may have had a very difficult situation. In other words, some people, for example, they alcoholics. Yeah, there's a genetic component that makes them more prone to alcoholism. And we'll hammer on that idea, like, well, genetics. But there's something that initiates that whole thing, which is the decision to start drinking in the first place, and the decision to take the other drink, before all the genetic things tend to kick in. I mean, a lot of times, especially today, we poo-poo those reasons, we ignore those aspects of it, we treat it as a type of compassion to say, well, but they can't help it. We can help a lot. We can help a lot. And I wonder how much we enable people to do those kinds of things. And it's not even just that. It's also worth looking at in our own lives, the kinds of things that we do, because people enable us to behave the ways in which we do. If there are rules that are set up to protect us, or if there's people in our lives that are allowing us to behave in certain ways, it's like, I've talked to homeless people before, where we'll say, oh, you shouldn't give homeless people any money because they're just going to use it for drugs and alcohol. Not like us, right? We don't use our money for drugs and alcohol, but man, homeless people, they do. What's the difference between us and homeless people? A lot of times it has to do with the support structure. That they don't have a support structure, perhaps, of people in their lives who were able to help keep them off of the streets. Sometimes they don't have the access to mental health services that a lot of us have. And yet we'll look at them and just kind of shake our heads at homeless people and be like, oh man, they'll never change. And we'll look at the people in our lives oftentimes and think for some reason that we think that they will change. Maybe it's because we see something in them that gives us hope. In other words, if our alcoholic parents can change, well then man, maybe that gives us some level of power in our own lives that we otherwise don't feel like we have. If I can get my mom to stop drinking, well then that means I've accomplished something positive in somebody else's life. But yet, what about my own life? What about my own life? It's a hard thing to say, well, but my mom is responsible for herself. And yeah, I should probably focus on myself. We think that's oftentimes being very cruel to say things like that. But man, if you don't focus on yourself, someday you're going to have kids who are going to be doing the exact same thing with you. And maybe it won't be alcoholism. Maybe it'll be something else in your life. Something else that you're dependent on, or something else that you haven't dealt with or gotten over. In other words, this is how it is that we tend to pass the sins of the parents off onto the children, as it were. Because we don't deal with those things on our own. Instead, as a way of trying to cope with our own difficulties, we reach out and try to help other people with theirs. And I wonder how many of you are that person who you have friends who come to you all the time with their problems and they want to talk things out because they see you as being wise. And if you are that person, that's a good thing, by the way. This isn't to say that you should just kind of send them away and shut up because you haven't sorted out your own life. What it really is, it's a call to sort out your own life. It's a clarion to sort yourself out, so that when people come to you, it's not going to be a matter of if. If you're already that person that people come and talk to, then that means that people already are seeing you as wise in some way. And that's only going to get more with life. As you get older, you're only going to have more and more and more people coming to you, because there's just something about you. Even if you're not trying to, there's just something about you that people come to you for advice and help. And so that being the case, maybe there's a level of responsibility to be somebody who's worthy of giving advice. Somebody who's wise, and not just appears to be wise, but actually is that thing. Because we can see people as being things all day when they're not really that thing. And if that's the case, we might feel good about it, like, wow, people think I'm smart, people think I'm wise, but we know that we're a fraud. And so maybe it's a good thing to become wise. And then, of course, becoming wise, that's a whole other question. How do we do something like that? So if we're waiting for people to change, if we're waiting for a job, if we're waiting for whatever, this is the hard part, because waiting suggests that we don't have any more control over it. And if it's out of our control, it's painful. But then what do? Do we move on, forget about it? I wonder if you've ever done that before, like given up on something, moved on, and you're just wondering, like, well, what if there was one more day? What if it was just one more day that this would have been different? Like, I think back to when my mom had a heart attack, and she was in coma for a few weeks. And the doctor, I remember telling me that she had a 5% chance of coming out of the coma. And he told me that she only had a 5% chance because they're not supposed to say 0%. He said, we're not supposed to give anything lower than 5. He said, if I could, I'd say 0. But, we'll say 5%. And I think back that my mom was injured one time, and she was given a 5% chance of ever walking again. And yet she did. She walked very well. And so I thought, well, she's beaten those odds before. And I remember when she had the heart attack, I talked to the doctor who treated her back when she had these problems. And the doctor said, yeah, I didn't give her much of a chance back then either. But he looked at all of her charts and said, I give her less of a chance now. That's probably it. Okay. So at like 20 years old, I had to make a decision to take my mom off of life support. And the doctor said she'll last about 24 to 48 hours off of life support. Okay. She lasted 3 weeks. And if that doesn't give you pause after 3 weeks to sit there and go, maybe I shouldn't have made that decision so rapidly. Because again, the doctors were completely wrong about the time frame. Maybe they were wrong about her chances of survival. I don't know, but she did eventually die, of course. So which one do? Do you wait? What if I just kept her on life support for 1 more day or 2 more days? Would that have been? If so, she'd still be there. We oftentimes think that persevering and holding on is some kind of a virtue. And it can be, under certain circumstances. If something is worth holding on to, if something seems like it actually might work out, but holding on when there's no hope is not a good thing. because people have a way of drowning in that lack of hope. People will kind of like stand on a desert of hope and say, oh, I'm drowning. You're not, dude. There's no hope that's there. And the more time that you spend on those things that are not going to be fruitless, that are not going to work out, the less time you're spending on the things that are going to work out. It's like in business. One of the really important things to know in business is when to pull the plug on your investment. You don't want to pull it too soon, because what if it doesn't pan out? Businesses have difficulties. And people who make a bunch of money off it are people who are able to see through those difficulties. But that's because they can see through the difficulties to find where on the other side of these challenges there's a great opportunity. But that's different from looking on the other side and wishing or hoping that there's an opportunity. And a lot of times we walk through very difficult times with people because we're hoping that on the other side there's some kind of opportunity for them to be better or for ourselves to be better. But at some point you've got to walk away. You have to live your life, because the more time that you're spending on those things, the less time that you're investing on yourself. I tell a story sometimes about a friend of mine from high school. I still talk to him today. He's one of the only people I still talk to from high school. And his brother was schizophrenic, would go off of his medication. I've told some of the stories about him before. But this is a guy who when I talk to him now, he still thinks back to high school. I very rarely ever think back to high school or college. I very rarely ever think back to the past. I'm very kind of present-minded and future-minded. But this friend of mine, he looks very much back to that past and goes, hey, remember that time that you guys all, and he would tell me a story about something that he was excluded from, or he felt excluded from. He wasn't ever actually excluded from anything. It was that he couldn't go and do those things with us because he was concerned about his brother. His parents were older. And he was always concerned that his brother was going to attack his parents, go off of his meds, attack his parents. So he was home all the time, just to make sure his parents were safe. This is a guy who had to give up all of his teen years, had to give up all of his 20s, and his brother finally passed away. And he had to, all of a sudden, look back over 2 decades. And yeah, there was something positive at the end of it, which was that his parents were safe, but he also had to come to grips with the idea that he had lost the last 20 or so years of his life, his younger years, because of that. Yeah. At what point did he have to give up on that and start living his own life? Because today it's still something that bothers him. He looks back on it and thinks back about all the things he's missed out on. And there were a lot. There's a lot. At some point we have to understand that the life that we live, well, I mean, there's just the one life that we're going to live. And then everybody that we interact with is going to interact with us through that lens of the life that we've lived. In other words, if you're somebody who gave up your youth, well, then you're somebody who's going to have children someday that you're going to live vicariously through. There's almost nothing that's more psychologically damaging to a child than the unlived life of the parent. So if we don't live those things in ourselves, we're going to project them onto other people and want other people to live them. I'm thinking of a friend of mine right now. The guy's older than me, guy's in his 40s, and he talks to me about the things I do in my life, and he marvels at me. He's like, man, I want to do that, and he encourages me to do stupid stuff too. And he's a terrible influence on me because I don't really need, motivation to do stupid stuff. I just need opportunity. But he's the guy who motivates me to find more opportunity to do stupid stuff. And when you look at his life, he's married, he's got kids. In his mind, he's thinking that he can't do any of those kinds of things that he sees other people do, the adventures. Why? He didn't do them when he was younger. And there's reasons for that. He suffered through a lot of abuse and things when he was a kid. It limited his ability to fully experience his own life. I'll leave it at that. And so he sees other people do things, and he wants to live through that. So, at some point, we have to give up our hope for a better past. We have to start with where we are and start moving forward. That means maybe not waiting so much. Maybe forgetting a little bit more. They're both going to be painful. Life is suffering. We don't get to choose not to suffer. Suffering is intrinsic to existence. You can't exist and not suffer. but we can find something that makes the suffering worthwhile. We can find something that helps us to transcend that suffering and make it all worthwhile. So not knowing which to do is the worst kind of suffering, but perhaps the worst kind of suffering is getting stuck between those two and not doing one or the other, particularly not moving forward. Because if you're suffering right now and you don't move forward, guess where you're going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And some of you, I imagine, know people like this. So I guess the question is, do you want to be those people? Want to be something else? I don't know. It seems like a pretty easy decision for most of us as we're sitting at a desk. But it turns out to be a very difficult thing for a lot of people in real life. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Happy Tuesday.